What do you think is like contributing to so many of the problems that we have today in regards to that lack of communication, where we're not able to
I think
have those
that's
environments? Yeah.
Yeah,
Go
I
ahead.
think that's a really complicated question, and I don't think that there's any one. I guess like I would say broadly, if I'm going to take a feminist approach, I would say broadly, I would just blame patriarchy, and then I would say there's a whole bunch of stuff underneath that where there's a whole bunch of different parties that can kind of like come under question here, or have some responsibility for this. So if I were to balance out like an attack on both sides, right? If I say here's a criticism for both sides, I would say that men have a problem here because sometimes it feels like men have this ownership or entitlement over a woman, like they're like a slot machine. Like if I put in enough stuff, it should come out at the end. Like if I buy you dinner and I drive you or whatever, like you kind of owe me sex. Like I did this for you. Like now you have to do something for me. I feel like there's an entitlement part on men there that's very not healthy. That
Okay.
yeah, that needs to not be the case. From the other end, I would argue that when you set up situations where men are unilaterally expected to make the first move over and over and over and over again, and no woman ever has the courage to say anything, and sometimes women turn down men because they feel like it's what to do, you're naturally setting yourself up for situations where like, okay, well, eventually some guy is going to take this too far. Like if it's constantly on men to always make the first move, and we have to do this over and over and over again, like somebody's going to overstep their boundaries. Like it's going to happen. That's inevitable. So like, you know.
Okay, so that's already interesting right there. So you said that there's an expectation because the men, that's the first thing you said, because the men did something for the women, they're expecting something in return, correct? Um, is the problem the idea that they expect something in return, or is the issue with the fact that if they don't get what they expected, then they turn toxic? Or then they stop being considerate of what the other person's wants and needs are?
Yeah, I would say more specifically that you like stop having any consideration for the other person because you're not getting what you want
Okay.
out of them.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. No. On that point, I agree. And thing on the men are expected to make the first move. I agree that that's an issue. I also just don't believe that women will ever want to get to a place where they're forced to make first moves and put themselves out there.
I mean, that has to happen eventually. It has to happen.
Do you believe it will?
I hope so. I can say prescriptively, like we ought to do these things, but it's hard to know. Like it's really hard to know how much is baked into us in terms of like male female stuff if we could reach that point. So I mean, I'll push for it as much as possible. It might be after like 50 years, like okay, hold on, women are actually incapable of doing this thing. I don't know if I believe that. I think they probably are. But I mean, obviously, all of these types of things are hard to say. Like how far could we push for things to work versus like this will never happen. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think those things are very seeped in gender roles in regards to, you know, I hate using these terms, but like in terms of the market for women and the market for men, I feel like ladies don't have to feel that sense of desperation the way men do. And so oftentimes that need to approach comes from the fact that women can't afford to sit back because it works in their favor. And if there's not a built-in need, then I don't see the reason why they would go out there for themselves. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, but it's part
Part
of like changing. Hopefully slowly we have to change the culture on that because like
Okay.
yeah, and I think some parts of the culture can change and some things like need to. Like there's because in some ways women are moving in like awesome strides, but they still have some like archaic views of like dating, which is like really sometimes. So like the easiest go-to example of this, for instance, is like women are out graduating men now in school, and a lot of women are earning more and more money as they graduate and they get better jobs in the marketplace. However, women are still not willing to date down in income, generally speaking. Everything I say is a generalization based on polling data.
Right.
Yeah. So like that's awesome that women are working now, and that's awesome that women, are earning as much as men in some areas, but they're still not willing to date down in income, which men are. So like that unbalance there or imbalance like creates like weird distortionary effects on like dating markets and whatnot, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Something that's related to this. Oh, I'm sorry. I caught this on Twitter once that really triggered the of me, and I made a response. I have to be really careful when I talk about these things because I can either come off as an incel or an ultra feminist depending on who's listening. But I think, do you know who Tommy Lauren is?
Yes.
Tommy Lauren made this huge twit longer, or not twit, it was like a 3-minute video or whatever, not a huge thing. But she made this thing where she was complaining about all these loser men. She's like, I've got my together, I've got a career. What's up with all these loser men that have barely graduated college? They don't have anything going on in their lives. They don't have any career. They don't have any job, blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, damn, well, that describes like 99% of women that men were usually willing to date before, but like that's not enough for you now as a woman with a career. Because prior to that, for a lot of men, they just needed a woman to be pretty and be able to take care of the house, And now you're even though you're now in a position that men were, you're not willing to let men slide into the position that women were, right? You're upping and upping and upping your expectations. And that like mismatch, I think, is really unhealthy. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. No, I agree. I think this really comes down to the idea that, You know, as much as we advance as a society in a lot of different ways, some things still stay very archaic in regards to, yeah, I might want my money and I want to be able to make as much money as possible, but I also want to. I do like the idea of being provided for. I do like the idea of still being protected. I still like the idea of someone being taller, stronger, or bigger than me, because as much as I may advance in a lot of ways, there's still some parts of me that are like very dinosaur brain in a lot of way, and there's a lot of reasons for that to be really ingrained in us. But I just question whether or not we're ever going to want to get to that point where we're going to want to abandon these roles, despite the fact that our social circumstances are changing. You know, like as much as we want to tell ourselves that's necessary, and I agree with you, it'd be wonderful if we wouldn't want to do that. But it's hard for me to encourage people to do something that, one, potentially will hurt their self-esteem tremendously, and two, they don't necessarily have to do because of the way the market works for them as a whole. I agree that for women who make a tremendous amount of money, they've got their own separate specific set of issues, but for most women, like, they don't have to worry about that nearly as much.
I mean, yeah, but like, I think it would be good to balance it out because maybe it gives people more empathy for both sides too. I'm sure you must have had multiple cringy moments in your life where white people are trying to explain racism to yourself, right? And you're just thinking like, oh my God, like you have no idea, you know? I've had moments like this where like you talk to women or whatever, and it's really funny because I've talked to multiple women about this where I'll say like, you know, hey, you should make the first move sometimes. You rely on us to do all the time. And like women will unironically say so. Like, do you know, like, oh my God, could you imagine like doing that and getting turned down? Like how humiliating and embarrassing. And I'm like, yeah, like, wait, what the yeah, of course I know what that feels like. What are you talking about? Yeah, so I mean, I think having that experience on both ends, I think would make it more positive for everybody. Like, you know, kind of spread the empathy around and everything, you know?
I think empathy is very easy to engage in where you don't have to put your self-esteem on the line. It's easy for me to sit there and be like, I sympathize with you because this is what you go through. But sympathizing is not the same as empathizing. Putting yourself and actually going through similar experiences that they would go through is a very difficult thing, especially if that experience means, oh, I might get rejected and this will devastate me. Because at the end of the day, you know, someone saying no to you, whether you're a man or a woman, is going to hurt. But for women who don't necessarily have to put themselves out there as much, they're like, why would I put myself through that? There's like no reason. It's unnecessary. So while I agree with you, it's good. And I do think it would be good. I just don't think people would want to do it for self-preservation purposes.
Hopefully, I mean, all I can say is I hope we get there. Like, I think that some things are capable of changing. When it comes to like sexual stuff too, like so something that like was very crazy to me is like in high school, like getting sex out of women is a massive game, or at least in the United States, or at least where I was growing up. Like there is a whole bunch of shit that goes into like trying to somebody. But I'd noticed that once you got to college and the women were like a bit more sexually liberated, that you didn't have like, there's still like dumb that happens in college, but it was a way more straightforward process. And it kind of blew my mind when I was like, oh, like some women just enjoy, you know, like it doesn't have to be this huge game where you're trying to get something out of somebody that is like guarding it from you, you know, like, and I would hope that like that kind of idea could be more broadly applied to society, that as women become a little bit more sexually liberal, you don't have these same like huge imbalances in marketplaces of like all the men chasing the sex and the women being the sex gatekeepers, and that can kind of ease over time would be the goal or the hope, I would say.
A lot of people, when you say stuff like that, a lot of people bring up the idea of like, well, there's a certain biological aspect where irrespective of what we may want, women still have that I don't know how scientifically accurate that is, but I've heard it so many times, so I'm just repeating it. But basically, because of their wiring, they want to engage in that kind of gatekeeping because it's in their best interest due to whatever risks, whether it be pregnancies or things like that. So what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure that to some extent, there's going to be some truth to this. Like there are biological realities that we're always going to have to contend with. You can't ignore that. Right. I think that like the most important thing that I learned in doing more like biology research is I think that one thing we need to wipe from our minds is like nature versus nurture. This is something that we hear repeated a lot, and it's like the strange dichotomy that we have built up, but it's not really true. There is no such thing as nature versus nurture. Like genes always have to express themselves in an environment. So the question is just like how much can we like change the expression of a particular gene or phenotype or something in a particular environment. Now, it might be the case that there's some stuff that's just so hardwired into us, it's not really going to be able to change that much, you know? Like, it might be the case that even in a perfect egalitarian society, maybe 75% of men are programmers and 25% of women are programmers, or of all the programmers, 75% are men, 20%. That might just be like something that's baked into us. But I think a lot of these things are kind of malleable socially in ways that I don't think we're there yet, where we're like, oh yeah, we've tried everything we can, like we just have to throw our arms up and give up, you know?
Yeah. Well, I mean, as long as we can remove as much of those social factors as possible, then I think that is good for all of us. And who knows what society's going to look like? I mean, I'm sure our parents didn't imagine us being like this where we are right now. So,
Yeah, of course.
And
And I think
and
I think
also-
something really important on that too is like I think the way that you know you're getting closer is like how you see how people feel about the feelings they have. Like, so for instance, if we reached a society where we thought we did everything we could and we ask a woman, you're like, why aren't you having as much sex as you could be? Like, men are so much more hungrier. And the woman is like, I just don't really feel it that much. Then it's like, oh, okay, maybe we are actually reaching like some equilibrium here and men do desire more. But when you still have a society where so many women say things like, I don't know, like I'm kind of ashamed of like masturbating, or I kind of feel gross about my own body. Like I feel like I shouldn't really like these things because of my upbringing. Then it's like, well, okay, maybe we have a little bit more room to wiggle here, where it's not like some biologically hard baked thing. It's more like the influences that we have growing up are kind of pushing women towards these feelings about sex.
I want to be that optimistic. I just think considering the dating market, like I know that for a woman to approach a man and to ask him out, and like the likelihood of it being successful compared to a man's experience of asking a woman out, it's like just knowing how much better odds that they have, and they still don't want to even take a small chance. It makes me slightly discouraged that that outcome may happen, but one can always hope.
Yeah.
I appreciate that, Destiny.
All right, bye. Remember to hit that like and subscribe, and don't forget the notification bell so that my videos show up right in your feed.